Thank you for coming to our first webinar of 2022. This is the start of our third season, and this is webinar number 124 since we started these in March of 2020. And we've had such a good time, and this is a webinar that is all of our co-hosts today have been co-hosts in the past, and including Thijs, who we met through these webinars. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going. But really thankful for everybody to be here, and hope your new year is going well. We're going to talk today about racing sim data. Racing sim data and how best to use it in the race studio analysis world. It is wintertime, and some of us race. We do have any number of rally racers that I chat with occasionally, certainly just in my little world, that are using our data. And it is a busy time of year for them, but a lot of us have a little bit of free time to do some things we might want to do, and sim racing is one of those things that a lot of folks are doing. So this time of year, I thought it would be great to kind of reintroduce the topic of racing sim data and AIM, and bring some people together and chat about it, and get some things out there, talk about some different ways of doing it. We've done a couple of webinars in the past where we talked about some of the technical details of where the data is stored, and the file structure, and how to bring it in, and all of that, and we may hit on some of those topics today, but we've got some links that'll be in the chat box. If you're watching this later on YouTube, they'll be in the description. Everything we mentioned goes in the chat box live that the folks are able to grab here will also be in the description box in YouTube later. So keep that in mind. The presentation, we're not going to go through every slide here today, so I made we zipped up the PDF file, and that link will be made available for everybody in the chat box, and of course in the description later, if you're watching this later in YouTube. So keep that in mind. And first thing I'd like to do is introduce the folks that we have. Oops, introduce the folks that we have joining us here today. We've got James Colborn. We'll talk a little bit more about in detail with everybody. James Colborn, who has been has helped us here with several times as a co-host for different topics, including one of our early ones where we introduced that when we started to have everything set up for racing sim data to be brought into the AIM software. We've got Ray Phillips, who's joining us here today. He is a strong user of racing sim information in a couple of different ways. He also co-hosted with us on a webinar that we'll link down below, where he talked about making vehicle adjustments based on racing sim information, making the adjustments and kind of getting ahead of the game before he goes to the track. So Ray is joining us today. Thank you very much. Thijs is we first met Thijs through these webinars, and Thijs came on, and we had he co-hosted with us once about some of the stuff that he has learned from the webinars, and how other people are learning things from what and putting into action things that they're learning from this webinar series. And then we've got Emiliano, who is a many-time co-host here with us. AIM Milan is AIM Italy. He is here to talk some about the technical details, and he's also a racing sim enthusiast. So what I've also done is included down underneath their pictures, you've got a picture of each of the users' sim racing rigs. So it's kind of interesting to see. I like James's. I like the red background for AIM. I'm an AIM guy, obviously, right? So he's got that, and I had to make the pictures fairly small, but you can see, and James will talk about it a little bit. There's an AIM dash there. He uses some AIM hardware that he uses to set up, actually see the data as it's coming across. And when I really look close at the picture, when it was full size, when I first opened it up my email, there's even a trophy over here. And I thought that was pretty cool. Hey, he's even got the something there to kind of shoot for. Ray has got the big 4-screen unit going on there. Pretty impressive sim rig. Thijs, I think, is fairly new at this large of a and big of a sim rig. I'm going to ask everybody to talk a little bit about their stuff here in a minute before we actually dive in. Emiliano has had a sim rig in the past, but he's had to he's revamping it right now. But I did include a picture of the sim rig that we used in our booth at the recent PRI show in Indianapolis, and we had internet, of course, is not that great in a big convention hall, but we did load and locally run some data on board, and we had people backed up to sit down in the sim rig and run that where we had one of our new Formula steering wheels, and we had I think it was a Pro 4 off-road race truck from the Crandon, Wisconsin World Championship track. Everybody just enjoyed it a lot. People coming and sitting in that and getting their time in behind the sim rig too. So that was kind of fun. So I would like to just take a minute and have our co-host. We'll just run across the path just like we just did. We'll start with James, then Ray, Thijs, and then Emiliano, and just chat about their background with sim racing, how they used it a little bit if they want to talk about the hardware that they've created and what they've done. So James, kind of started off with a little bit of your background in the sim side and how you use sim data.
Sure. So hello everyone, thanks for having me here to be part of this. First of all, let's talk about this rig. I have space as a premium, especially working from home. This is in my office, so I have a rig that I can fold up and put away, which is nice in a way. And so the areas that I sort of invested in, I made sure I had good pedals, good steering wheel to sort of ensure that I was getting the right kind of feedback that I needed as I was doing practice. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. I also have the AIM dash, which has been an opportunity for me to be able to understand more about how the AIM software and the hardware work together for sim racing, and I'll chat a bit about that. But starting out, it was years and years ago. I don't know how many people remember Xbox had. Well, I think it was Xbox. I'm sure there was one for Gran Turismo as well. But I was able to get. I think it was Forza 4 was the one that I had. I had the seat, had the pedals that came from, I can't remember which company it was, and started to love that. And that was when I lived all the way out in Seattle. And then there was a big gap. And I think the gap was sort of more associated with the fact that I was, racing. I didn't have not necessarily the time, but, there was a question of priorities and what I was going to focus on. And then the pandemic came about, and a lot of my friends in the US were saying, hey, we're all getting together and racing on iRacing. And so, I reinvested in the right PC that could run iRacing, which was surprisingly powerful. It needed to be, and got all the equipment I needed. And since then, it's been sort of reintroduced to my experiences. I absolutely love it, to be honest. And I think that the sim racing is interesting because, we'll talk about lots of different things, but for me, there are key aspects of how I use sim racing, and some of it is for fun. And I think that the last thing I mentioned when we were talking about, what's the best way to describe it, yesterday in our sort of our chat before we did our panel, the last thing I mentioned was the fun aspect of it, which was, hey, I got a chance to run, an R8 Le Mans at Alton Park the other day, which will never happen in my racing sort of opportunity, whether it's talent or budget related in that sort of aspect. And so that whole sort of opportunity to be able to experience things that ordinarily are sort of unattainable for so many people. And it's a lot of fun, especially racing and working with friends. But the thing that I started to love about the sim racing as a data enthusiast was the fact that I could start sort of using it as part of prep. So I do an absolute ton of practice on tracks that I may not have had a huge amount of experience in, or haven't run for a year. That would give me the opportunity not only to remember the layout, and remember sim racing is fantastic if you've never driven a track. I still haven't mastered the Nürburgring though, but at the same time, being able to practice a track you've never been at has been fantastic. Then there's just running a ton of laps and then looking at the data to be able to see what your driving style and the consistency is. And you can get vehicles that are pretty close to what we actually run in real life. And you can see what your, where the inconsistency is in terms of the racing and the opportunity. And then the final thing that I like to start sort of working on is well, there's two actual things. The first is that sim racing presents you with channels that you may never have the opportunity to work with. You may start out with an AIM Solo 2, which is what I had for years, or Solo than a Solo 2. The whole thought of having throttle position and brake pressure sensors and steering position. In fact, interestingly enough, I'm just upgrading my Formula Ford that I run, and there will be a steering position sensor in this one. So I can practice ahead of time with the channel to make sure that when I'm at the track and I'm working through a workflow and looking at data analysis, I'm not figuring out again what's happening with steering input when I'm at the track. I'm figuring out before I get there to be able to work through that. And then the last thing, and there's a reason I have the dash as well, is that if anyone has talked to me about dashes and dash layouts, my general rule of thumb is that for me personally, I don't want anything more on the dash that I don't need to know about when I'm racing. All I need to know is the bare minimum of information that will ensure that I can get the best performance. And so someone's just written rally page for the win. Matt's absolutely right. This is the one that I absolutely love and use all the time. Is I just need the bare minimum of information. So it's allowed me to be able to practice working through what dash configurations and layouts work for me, what information is superfluous to need, and what do I need afterwards. And so add all those things together, and sim racing has presented for me, and I'm sorry, I've blabbed on for ages here, has presented to me a fantastic opportunity of being able to just sort of extend racing into my home beyond being in lockdown. Now it's a sort of a staple as part of my everyday as it relates to practice and operation with racing.
It's funny that when I was starting to formulate what direction this webinar might go, and in my mind, you four were the ones I wanted to bring in to chat about this. I had it in my mind that most people use sim racing data for their single use, or at least that's the way they start, right? And it's going to be fun during the pandemic, and I can't race, so let's get this together. But then really it came down to me. There was like 5 different things, and you guys all represent maybe the bulk of what you do. It fits into one of these categories. Certainly the fun part of it. I think that's just across the board, but you have vehicle performance. We're going to go to Ray here in just a second and chat about some of his background with it, where you can take a vehicle that's the same class or type of car that you're running, and you can make changes. You can make those sway bar changes, or the tire pressure changes, or whatever, and go make some laps, and then grab the data, bring it in, and practice through that, and start to learn more about the type of car that you run and what changes will make that work. You have the driver improvement side. That's how I've kind of seen James. I've watched James do that a lot, where he just continues to work on things and try some different things. You've got the hardware setup. James mentioned that, where let's take the gauge out of my race car, bring it in, buy a second one for your rig, however it works for you, bring it in, connect it up. We've got it all set up where you can create different displays, try different things, try different warnings and alarms, and change pages automatically, when certain things happen, those kind of things. So there's a hardware setup piece of it. And of course, then the part that I enjoy the most, that I wanted to make sure we get in here, is it's data practice. James just mentioned it. He has not played a ton with steering data, so you can, and I think everybody's going to talk a little bit about this, but you grab the data. Either if you're taking it into Race Studio 2 or Race Studio 3, it goes to both. You can set up your user profiles around. Try something, and hey, if I added the steering sensor and my set of user profiles I've been so used to for the last couple of years, hey, I'm going to tweak this and have this set up. You can fine tune those and get those ready to go before you go to your first race weekend. I think that's just a huge value as well. So, Ray, in the past, you joined us, and you talked about you've joined us for several co-hosting of different webinars, but the one that you did around sim racing was making some, talking about how you made 5 or 6 different runs in a Ferrari, I think it was Ferrari Challenge car, and made some adjustments and watched how it all worked out, and then put that that information into your backpack and took it to the track and made some changes in the real world. Describe a little bit about how you use sim racing data, and then of course your sim racing rig there a little bit too.
Okay. Well, first of all, I started getting into sim racing probably a year or two after iRacing came out. Had a junky computer and not very good pedals, not very good steering wheel or anything else. But I was racing at the time, and this is before I became data engineer and driver coach. But I realized, hey, for like learning tracks and that type of thing, this is fantastic. A track you've never been to before, you can drive it on the sim before you even get there and at least know where the corners are, which way to go. So, I mean, that was a big advantage. And it didn't take me long to start upgrading stuff and, getting a bigger rig. This is my cockpit is an Oboto, which was probably one of the first ones that became popular. I can't remember what I bought that, maybe 2005 or something like that. It's been a great rig. It's got a little bit of flex, but I've stiffened it up different ways.
Just like in the real world, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it didn't take me long to get the triple screens and that type of thing. The reason why I have 4 screens is if I'm working with somebody personally driving my rig, I can actually look at their data traces on the 4th one, on the top one. So I can see, exactly what they're doing and give them immediate feedback. So that's why I have the 4th one. Personally, I use virtual reality a lot. That is my go-to now. I love that, I can look to the apex and look to the exit of the corner, and it just becomes more real to me. So it's a pretty powerful rig. I got a SimuCube 2 wheel, which gives great feedback. I think the 2 most important things are the wheel and the brake pedal. The brake pedal has to feel like a real brake pedal, and mine's a hydraulic brake pedal, so it feels realistic. So yeah, I mean, I've done everything on the sim, to be honest. There was a year where I competed with a teammate in the UK in a Lotus 79 championship, which was just a blast. And I'd come out of those races just mentally drained, dripping in sweat, because of all the competition and everything. And I think that's the cool thing about sims is you're basically getting everything in the real world except G-forces. So I think the triple screens and the virtual reality help that. But I think really what it also helps do is tune your other senses. So you don't have to feel the G-forces. Your brain knows what you should be feeling in real life. So I think that's really cool. Nowadays, I don't do much racing or anything on it. Every once in a while, I have fun with something, but it's mainly a tool for me. I do support a Ferrari Challenge team, and I actually had a Ferrari Challenge car made, by modifying probably a GT3 car or something. But I worked with a guy in Italy and, basically gave him data, that real life data from the real car, and then worked with him to get it pretty darn close. I think nowadays I'm within half a second to a second of what the real life car is going to turn at a real track. So, how the car accelerates, all that stuff is exactly the same. Top speeds are the same. And, it's an amazing tool once you really start using it. And truthfully, I taught myself a lot of my data engineering capabilities because, like James said, you get a lot more sensors on a simulator than you do in most cars. So when you start diving into what shock pots and all can give you, it's amazing what you can get out of it. And one good aspect of the sim is that some of your variables that change in real life don't change in the sim. So you can do things back to back and know that the change that you made is going whatever direction you're seeing. It's not being affected by other external variables. So anyway, that's how I use it.
Yeah, perfect. And you talked about in your previous webinar that we'll link in the chat box and have linked in the YouTube video later. That you had done that work and you have found that works fairly well for you. There was a question in the question and answer box, Ray. When you use your VR headset, your glasses, what brand, which glasses do you use?
Well, I've got an HP Pro, I forget the exact name, goggle headset. And then I wear glasses. So I've actually got prescription lenses input into the virtual reality. So I take these glasses off.
Very cool.
And I got prescription lenses in there.
How has that worked out for you as far as, and we'll get to everybody else in just a second, but how has that worked out for you as far as motion sickness, and how does that work on your rig? Are you happy with that compared to the monitors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't notice it at all. It actually feels weird to me now not to use the virtual reality. But I think a big mistake a lot of people make when they first try virtual reality, they try to drive as fast as they can. And especially if you like spin or something like that, it just messes with your brain. So you really need to take your time and not try to drive fast right off the bat, and maybe even drive just 15 feet and stop and look around and do 40 feet and, just
get used to it.
Just real slow increments. And if you start feeling any kind of sickness, take the goggles off, go do something else and come back.
Perfect. Yeah, I thought that would be a great tip for everybody that's listening, is if it's something you thought about trying, there's a couple tips there to make that work for you. Thijs has been with us from the beginning of these webinars. I'm not sure if anybody has attended more of them, and of course we brought him on as a co-host and talked about him and some of the different ways he uses data. But Thijs is I think the sim rig is fairly new. Thijs, give us a little bit of a background on how you use data and the hardware that you've put together.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely.
A little bit history. I started in '95 with Grand Prix 2. That was a PC game back then when I was young, and it already had good data inside of it. So that was also my first introduction to racing data. So I've been gaming for now 10, 15 years. Got married, started living together, don't have any budget or space for gaming or just other interests. And COVID came up, and the webinars, and the data side was really interesting again, and sim racing also, of course. So I bought my sim rig 3 or 4 months ago, more or less to put my data skills into practice and also have fun with the driving, of course. But investments was also pointed to the data side. So just to try new things, improve your knowledge, and also, like already said, use sensors that you don't have on your customers' cars, but you can get an idea of what they are bringing to the car or not. So also to advise people on the coming investments. And at the moment, I'm just trying to get up to speed in iRacing, working on my D license, so just started. And just try to use the data to improve my own, to improve my driving first. I think that's the most important point at the moment. So just having fun and getting up speed.
That you mentioned it, and it was one of the reasons that I wanted you to come on here. Yeah, we're all going to have fun with this, right? And that's a big part of it. But you working with that data and fine tuning the data skills is a big part of what you've mentioned to me, that the reasons you use it. And I think that's intriguing from our standpoint, obviously here. So we'll chat a little bit more about that end of it as we get a little bit closer. I want to bring Emiliano in now, and I'm going to hit him with maybe an unfair question right off the bat, but one of the questions in the question and answer, Emiliano, and you're kind of our IT computer programmer, and then of course a sim racing enthusiast as well. The question was something to the effect of, is there a minimum computer? And I know it's a little outside of what you may know, but have you got a gut feeling on how big and how powerful and how much of a beast do you need as a PC to run the 4 different forms of sim racing information we bring in?
Oh, well, if you refer to analyze data, I think that data analysis is not the most PC consuming part of it of the sim. I mean the simulator is the beast on PC hardware. Well, any machine you can buy for at least $2,000. I mean, it's good enough for having a good sim. If you want the support for many monitors, for more than one monitor, if you want to, the higher you want to go, I think the higher you have to pay for the machine.
Yeah, and probably on the websites of the places, the iRacing and Corsa and R Factor 2 will probably give you some ideas of what it is. Certainly, I think what important is what you just said is if the PC is strong enough to run the sim, the Race Studio side is covered. So
yeah, for sure,
exactly. What you've had a sim.
Roger,
you've said.
There's only one thing I was going to just add to that quickly, and we've talked about for data analysis. When you switch on telemetry on some of these programs, and I use iRacing, because it's recording 72 odd channels, the telemetry file, which in iRacing is called an IBT file, can get quite big, and it records one for, if you have it on switched on every session for practice, for everything that you do, actually, race and everything that's there. It will consume huge amounts of hard drive space if you're quite a prolific sim racer. And so it requires a fair amount of sort of administration, so to speak. So my only suggestion is, more than anything else, is as you go through that, making sure you've got good RAM and good GPU capabilities and all the things they recommend. Make sure you get a decent sized hard drive as well, because you will fill that up very quickly. Unless you diligently go in and delete what you've recorded on a regular basis. So that's the only thing I was going to add there. These data files, because they've got so many channels, are actually quite big.
And Emiliano maybe can add to that a little bit, but we're running it. I think that's certainly true. And then we also have on our end, outside of the sim racing, everybody is doing video and data together. So that hard drive space is something that as you're buying new computers or upgrading your old computers, hard drive space was always something I always put at the second or third level. Before, I would bring the video off of my PCs after a weekend at the track. Now you want to keep that in there. So hard drive space has become something that's much more important now. What are your thoughts on that, Emiliano?
Yeah, no, I only add that I think the most consuming simulator for what concerns the file size is Assetto Corsa Competizione. Is not iRacing. That's the most consuming. Assetto Corsa as well, because they don't have as many channels as iRacing, but their frequency, the frequency with which they update data is higher than iRacing. So it's very consuming.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about Emiliano. I'm going to show some slides here real quickly, and Emiliano prepared some slides. They're technical slides. The presentation, if you want to dig more deeply into these slides, is available. Robbie just linked it into the chat box. It'll be linked also in the YouTube description later. Grab this presentation. We're not going to go through these slides one by one, but there's some good information in here. And Emiliano, here are the 4 companies, the different ways that we can do the hardware platform. I'm going to work down into this slide, and maybe Emiliano can talk about it briefly. There is that side application that Emiliano has written and the software team has written that is what is
Yeah.
needed in
Yeah,
order to connect
it
and get this data into Ray Studio.
depends on the simulator you use. You should be in the need of this side application for either transmitting data to your AIM hardware, or for logging data. Normally, iRacing, for example, is not needing the side application to log data, because it logs by itself, while the Assetto Corsa family and R-Factor family need it for also logging data. I'd say that this presentation can be easily shared on the chat. We do not need it for now. I mean, it has several simulator feature several different data for every simulator. The most important thing with the channels is that say for iRacing, not all the channels are available for all the cars, while with the other two simulators, all the channels are always available. But if you choose a car that is not featuring some channels, the line recorded will be flat, and I think on a
and
default
you mentioned that depending on the chosen car.
While importing data, while you can import data in Ray Studio 3 or convert to telemetry data for Ray Studio 2, and while doing this, you can choose if you want the conversion to be done for a basic set of channels or for a complete set. The complete set is truly a lot of channels. It's hundreds of channels, and there's a lot of data involved. And my advice is to start with a low number of channels, and then move to the bigger number.
And so I wanted to show this slide is if you're watching this later and you're thinking about getting into RaySim and you're doing a little research, inside of Ray Studio 3 under the options conversion file settings, this is where you come in and set up and then determine those channels. And Emiliano mentioned you can click this, check this box of all channels for all the different forms that we do. Set the default area where the data is going to go, and then if you click all channels, you're going to get everything that comes at you, and it hundreds of different levels of channels depending on the car and the racing sim. If you uncheck it, you get a smaller subset that is probably more realistic of what you might want. You know, it's basically all of the most important things that you're going to want: steering, throttle, brake, you know, all the normal things, RPM.
The big set of channels feature information from the environment, from the racer, from the vehicle, from the engine, wheels, suspensions, and also information from the simulating machine. So you can, in most of the cases, you can get the direct feedback from the steering wheel in millivolts or in percentage. So you can tune your rig the best using sim data.
Perfect. And we're also there's a lot, and we chatted in the last couple of days about, is that minimum set of data channels or the full set, is that really all we should offer? And we've been chatting a little bit, and those of you that are watching this either live or later, let us know either in the chat box or email to an email that I'm going to show you here in just a moment, that should we do something where we've got the basic channels, the full channels, and then maybe an advanced set of channels where it's some more data, but it's not everything, right? So it's it might be interesting. The converting the data, just a couple of slides here, just kind of talking about how to bring the data into AIM, into Ray Studio 3. Not going to go into these technically now, but I wanted to leave the slides up here for you. How iRacing gives you GPS data, and maybe the other couple don't. But here's an email address, simracing@aimsportline.com. If you have some support questions or some thought questions where you might want to add a little bit of something or ask for something, different feature, there's the email address. And I would hope that everybody would give us some feedback and continue to help us build this into something that everybody is after. I'm going to jump back to that earlier slide now, and ask James. There was a question that came up that that I kind of wanted to go. It was one of my questions that I had here, and it talked about steering feel of the sim versus the actual car. You already answered a question, I think, verbally and in the chat box about brake feel. Ray talked about how that brake feel was so important. The question here is how do you sync the steering feel in the sim with the steering of the actual car? Is that there are settings, different levels of steering wheels, I suppose, a ton of different settings. What are your thoughts on that question?
So there are, and one of the reasons that I upgraded my steering wheel, and there were some conversations about direct. So I think everyone knows, or who's done research knows, that sort of like the ultimate best steering wheel would be a direct drive wheel. They're very expensive, but they give the best kind of feel because it's the force feedback that allows you to be able to get that sense of feel through sim in terms of things like understeer, oversteer, because the steering wheel is effectively fighting you. But depending on what your driving inputs and everything need to be. For me, I didn't quite go that expensive, but I did go with an upgraded system, which allows me to be able to calibrate both the force feedback of the wheel, and within the software or the sim itself, you can also sort of adjust the sensitivity to be able to give you that sort of feel. And I think that, you know, it is interesting. If you are somebody who likes sim, you can go on YouTube and you can find videos where people have talked about their steering wheels being so abrupt it's actually almost broken their arms or wrists. Rick actually mentioned it in one of the chat conversations. So I think that there's an element of that allows you to be able to sort of adjust it as you need it to be able to get a more sort of real sense. Now, I haven't gone to the lengths of adjusting the steering wheel based upon the type of vehicle that you're using, because you could imagine that, or I could imagine that, you know, a vehicle, and having driven vehicles where the power steering is adjusted and has failed, you know, it gets much heavier. And if you're driving a lighter car, like a sort of a go-kart or something, it'd be lighter type of thing. I've never gone into really adjusting it. I set it as one, but I just want it to be able to tell me the car is starting to oversteer, and you can course correct, obviously, as you would do as a driver, and those sort of aspects. And so, yes, in short, you can calibrate, and I think that then it becomes sort of user dependent, what you prefer to have.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And on the steering, you mentioned brake the same way that Ray mentioned earlier. I think somebody was about to add something to that. I heard. There you go, Ray.
That was me. Yeah, so I do have an expensive steering wheel, the SimuCube 2, a direct drive. And one of the cool things about it is that you can basically have a setting for every car that you drive. So like an open wheel car is probably going to be a lot lighter, more nimble than a heavy GT car. So literally you can dial it in for whatever car you drive. And then next time you drive that car, just choose that setting and you're ready to go.
Interesting. And you can probably, Ray, you're the best one to answer this. Feedback from the sim rig. Let's say you make a huge caster change or something in the car. Have you noticed that the feedback is instantly felt in not only the way the car handles, but in the feedback to you as a driver?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have a good wheel for it to do that. But yes, you know, I'm extremely happy with the feedback that I get from my wheel.
Perfect. The Thijs, you were talking. One of the things that you do or wanting to use your sim rig for is vehicle setup stuff. Have you how much have you worked on that? Made some changes, did some different things? Have you found a car that is close to either something you've been working on or might help engineer in the past or in the future? How much have you done the vehicle setup side with what you do?
I've been playing around with tire pressures and tire temps in Assetto Corsa, and that works quite well. So get my tire temps stable, and I can predict them compared to track temp at the moment. So that works quite good. And yeah, I've playing around with anti-roll bars and stuff for under and oversteer, and yeah, that works fine. that I've not gotten into the detail I want to do with understeer angles and.
You've only had it
stuff.
for 3 weeks or so. You're in that new learning process, which I think is interesting. What I also think is kind of cool. You talk about tire temperatures. I know we have done some Race Studio 3 ways of looking webinars using Race Studio 3 and ways to set up the screens and understand how to do tire temperatures and tire pressures. I know James has created entire YouTube videos on that that he has on his website. We will link that to his place, all of his YouTube videos in the chat box about that particular thing. I think that is such an interesting thing that we can do with webinar data, and maybe Thijs, you can touch on this, and then maybe we'll jump back to James a little bit. The actual act of grabbing the data and then practicing the setting up profiles and getting things set up and trying some different setups of data practice, right? Becoming a better data acquisition analyst by using this. How hard have you been working on that, and what's your plans in the future towards that, Thijs?
I'm at the moment building a profile for myself in the old Race Studio, and I really like to switch to Race Studio 3 when we are ready for production. I will switch completely to get all my math channels working and stuff, and then I will switch completely.
I'm going to come back to Emiliano on that topic in just a second. I'd like to bring James and Ray on their opinion on that, as well as doing things. James is such a student of this with his own racing and learning about data. And James, how far have you gone on as far as setting up the profiles and adjusting things as you're getting ready for the new season by using racing sim data?
So I think that I do a lot is the short answer. It depends on what. So you mentioned tire pressure. That's one of the areas where I think that the feed needs to come in a little bit better from iRacing, for example, to get truly the data you're looking for. But at the same time, in the game, we know that tire pressures do have. And I say game, it's sort of, I think that the sim providers probably say game is a bit of a stretch now. It's sort of, it's definitely sort of like a simulated experience in many degrees. And so there are lots of things that sort of, I work through. The key aspects, and I talked about this in a webinar a little while ago, and I think about the workflows that I use when I'm at the track. And they usually revolve around certain key things that I want to do quickly and get very comfortable with. And those usually involve things associated with the vehicle, engine health, associated with driver development, and associated with chassis development. And I think that in terms of my experience level, the engine health one, I usually leave to the channels I get from my car, because there's not much point in practicing channels that I don't have channels for. Driver development, on the other hand, is something that I definitely like working through different views. And, for me, there is a workflow that I have in my head. I like to see, and we've talked about this many times, the sort of the what's happened, why it's happened, where it's happened, and how it's happened type of approach. That's fantastic for being able to sort of, look through sort of different aspects of what's going on. And then, I think in that sort of respect, it just teaches that sort of discipline that you have in terms of quickly reading data, which is why I go back to what I was talking about earlier on in relation to sort of the ability to use channels that you may have going forward that you ordinarily didn't, to be able to start learning. Then there's the curiosity who says, well, if I want to learn about suspension travel, which is one of the things that I want to learn a lot more about this year, so I can start working on chassis development, then that's an area of opportunity where I can actually get that data from the sim and be able to work through. And so that's almost like an assignment that I've given myself with data that I don't have from my vehicle that I can get from sim racing. And it would be a cause and effect type of approach, which, I may start out in a scenario, and this is sort of part of the plan, is sort of like, what if I had, both bookends of the settings of my suspension set up and see what the handling of the car did, just to be able to see how that would drive. And I'd have the data there and then. So for me, there's an element of sort of like, as a data sort of enthusiast and someone who applies it to their racing, it's a constant learning. And then there's the other thing, which is just making sure that I'm comfortable, as I said, with the steering development this year in terms of bang, I can see it straight away. Because, we may talk about this later in the year, and I talked a little bit about it on a webinar that I did with AIM Shop and the folks in the UK, is the one thing that we never have enough of time of at the track is time. It's the ultimate premium that we forego in terms of an unexpected driver's meeting because there was unruly behavior on track, or something happens on the car, or heaven forbid you get into a bit of bench racing with other people and all of a sudden you're out of it. If I can get into the habit of finding everything I need to know in 5 minutes or less, then that's great. And so anything that I do with sim data just gives me that practice to be able to see it before I get to the track. And so that's the way I think about it.
And set up your computer, your profiles, and if you find you can't find it quickly, you adjust what you're doing, and you get yourself set up. I think that is such a valuable part of the racing sim information. So, Ray, I wanted to just chat a little bit before, and then I'm going to go to Emiliano on a question that Steve asks in the question and answer. But Ray, you have a business where you coach people, and you're a racer yourself, and then you also have this piece where you set up user profiles for people, the work screen setup. And is that something you have used sim data for to help you adjust and get things set up where you can add even more value to customers that use that service?
Yeah, I probably started with sim data, to be honest.
Yep, I was assuming so.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do even more with sim data because you got more channels. So there's lots of different things you can look at. When you've got shock pots and ride heights and all these things, you can look at roll lag, roll velocity, all these different things, and really try to get your head around how do you make this car better. And I even compare it to real life data, which Assetto Corsa, it was always easy to get into AIM, but now you can do it with iRacing too. But one thing I've done in order to compare to real data is I've created math channels that are basically just equal to the real data channel name. So that way, when I pull up the simulator data, it'll automatically say, okay, if speed in the real life data is, speed 2 or something like that, and in the sim it's speed, then I can say, all right, give me a math channel that says it's just speed, but it's equaling speed 2, so that when I pull in the real data, I'm seeing those overlays. So that's really important. The other thing is that I think you really need to use the simulator as a tool and not as a game. And I think James was alluding to that. When I was racing a lot and I was doing practice days, I don't think I ever did a practice day where I didn't have a game plan of different things I wanted to try and feel in the car, unless I was just learning the track or something. But I think it's important to do the same thing in the sim, and you want to get that feeling, say 2 or 3 laps in when your tires are up to temperature, and don't keep driving. In other words, do your 3 or 4 laps, get in your mind what that change did, stop, make another change, go do the same thing. You want to keep all those variables the same as much as you can. So, and you should be able to interpret what the car is doing in those 3 or 4 laps.
You mentioned in our talk yesterday, and I think you even made mention of it at the beginning of this webinar, but that's one of the cool things that you have found with Racing Sim is you can make these changes. You can set the sim to not have changing environmental things, right?
Right.
You can set the temperature at at a nice 75 degrees and the time of day, and go out and make changes and know that it's just the car or just you that are making these changes, which makes that engineering mindset be a little straightforward. Add a couple of questions, add a little bit of meat to the bones of that statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's extremely important. And if you're driving by yourself on the sim, then you don't have other cars coming into play either, which you normally have in real life. So yeah, I mean, I think if you use it in that manner, where you make your change, and I suggest initially make big changes so that you can really feel what it does. And then as you start to get the car more dialed in, now you start making smaller changes, But if you're just trying to figure out a car, say you've never driven it before, and you say, oh, well, this thing is understeering, and it seems to be corner exit, change the rear bar, make it stiffer, see if that made an improvement, make a big change, see how it feels. And all that stuff you do in the sim is going into your memory bank, so that when you experience it in real life, you'll have an idea. Oh yeah, maybe I should change the rear bar on this car, or maybe I should just give it more rear tire pressure. Whatever. Even if a car doesn't have a lot of setup changing abilities, you can still find something to change. I guarantee it.
And if not the car, the driver, the technique that you're using, right? So there's always something you can be testing and learning from.
Right, exactly.
Emiliano, Emiliano, I would like to have you kind of touch on Steve's question in the question and answer. He talks about sharing data. And will that be easy with AIM as well? The interesting thing about this, and Emiliano, if you can add a little bit to this, but we're bringing the data into AIM, either Race Studio 2 or Race Studio 3, and then the normal process of sharing data is totally internal of the AIM process. So very, very simple to grab that file and send it, right? Is there anything you'd like to add to Steve's question there about sharing data from the sim information?
Yeah, we are coding. I mean, it's almost available in our internal version. We are coding the possibility of a cloud for AIM data. Data will be shared directly within Race Studio 3, and can be shared among all my PC and among all me and my friends or my teammates. Still in the need for some coding, but I'm doing this in these days, so should be available soon.
Yeah, so the sharing of data, Steve, is as easy as if you were sharing your Race Studio data now, right? So that it's actually fairly straightforward, and it's followed by a question by our good friend Chris Stifler that he talks about. He has a brand new sim rig. Very cool, Chris. Congratulations. And I know you've been doing a lot of work, and he talks about the work you're doing is a Cosworth-based data system, but using AIM is far easier. The AIM data, again, it's kind of the same answer, but AIM for sim to be an easy interface. Well, the data comes off the sim and goes through a process that Emiliano and the software team has written to bring it in, and you're just using AIM, either Race Studio 2 if that's what you still want to use, or the new Race Studio 3 analysis program. So you're it's bring it into Race Studio, do all the work you normally do.
Yeah, it's very easy, and it can be the importing of data inside the analysis software can be also automated. It's not a choice I do normally because I prefer to trigger the import manually, but yeah, it can be also automated. So it's easy to make it work. I mean, it depends. And then if you want to create a very complex and difficult configuration, yeah, it's a matter of days. Create it can take days to create a good configuration that matches your need, or to replicate exactly what you have in the car. But I mean, it's rather easy. It's rather straightforward.
Yeah, you guys have done just a fantastic job on this process of getting that data into something that most of us already know, and so it works out really well. We've got about 5 more minutes. I'd like to go through the room, and starting with James. And I know James, you read a question there from Charles Hodge, and mentioned that you wanted to answer that question. So answer that question a little bit, and then give us some closing ideas about sim racing as we kind of tidy up this webinar.
Sure. So the answer to, so Charles asked the question about, have you ever watched and quantify your input trace while driving? And I have to say the answer is yes. My learning style, especially at the track, I'm using the word workflows a lot, but how I learn, how I like data is I'm a smarty can guy. If I want to see quickly on a track I'm very familiar with what I'm doing well, I'll put the smarty can in and I'll look at my feet traces and I'll be sort of saying to you, why are you half throttle there? Why is your brake trace on, off, and sort of starting to assess where I'm working differently. The beauty of iRacing that I use, and I'm sure exists with the others, is that you can either sort of record and watch later, or you can watch after your session. You can watch the same thing with your inputs, your feet, your hands, actually on the screen. I'd love that. It's not necessarily an aim thing, but it allows you to be able to do that. And it does lead into one of the other questions. We'd lovely to be able to have, someone wrote, can we do video and data using the trace from AIM? And I'd love Emiliano's thoughts on that, maybe, going forward. What I'll say in terms of a close is that for me, the sim racing falls into two buckets. The first is that, you get into that sort of, continuing that discipline of driving, learning tracks, being on track, enjoying it. But there's a second part of it, which doesn't feel like it fits into the definition of sim racing, but it falls into the definition of using sim racing to become better at your personal racecraft, let alone the racecraft you have racing against other people, because, there are lots of bashes and crashes on iRacing as people sort of, forget the fact that if this were real life, they would be expensive and dangerous. But one of the other aspects is that Ray mentioned it earlier was that, go and do 3-4 laps. If you're racing, in some cases, the racing that I would do is you get to the track on a Saturday morning, you qualify, you race, you go home. You qualify, race, go home. There's no practice. That qualifying session is 15 minutes. If it's red flagged, it's over, which means you've got to get your quickest laps as soon as you possibly can to be able to qualify really well. What better place to be able to practice the technique of being able to get in a sim, do 4 laps, do the best laps you can, and then stop, rather than doing 25 and saying, oh, look at this fantastic lap time I did. Well, it's no surprise you did that 25 times till you found it. When are you going to do that in real life? And so there's that practice element. And there's a few things that I'm working on as well, which are sort of ancillary to the sim racing. But it's sort of, so I'm a right foot braker in a race car, but I'm a left foot braker on the sim. And now with the race car that I run, I could do lift shift and I could brake with my left foot, as well as my right foot, because sorry, excuse me. And so have I found enough courage to be able to build up moving from right foot to left foot in a race car? No, not yet. But the more practice I do and the more comfortable I get with the confidence that I'm not going to hit the brake pedal. And I don't know how many of you have hit the brake pedal with your left foot in your street car and almost head-butted the steering wheel. How do you overcome that fear that you're going to do that in a race car? Well, sim as an ancillary sort of benefit to sim racing is you can practice that too. So for me, I think sim racing has so many different benefits, but there's other things that you can bring in terms of race experiences that go beyond necessarily just how well did you take that corner and how well did you drive that particular line. And so those are my sort of closing thoughts.
Perfect. Thank you. Ray, what are your some closing thoughts on yours? And one of the things maybe to start with is I've talked to 2 or 3 people that have been struggling with the act of heel and toe correctly, and their racing sim data they've had to adjust some things to make it just like you do in your car, and yet then they went to work on practicing that one fundamental thing and got it good, and when they got to their race car they were able to do it. What, to kind of close up your piece of it here, any experience on something like that?
Yeah, one, I probably did help myself by heel and toeing that way. And one thing I found with heel and toeing is that your pedals have to be in the exact right positions to do it well, so, if you can get those right in the sim, that might give you a better idea of what you need to do in the real car if you're not able to do it well. I actually kind of did teach myself the left foot brake like James, because I went from a Formula V to a Formula F. And I started left foot braking in my Formula F. And I also taught myself how to lift to shift, because, you can, like James was saying, you can just lift off the throttle and put it in the next gear, and that's not something you're really used to doing. So I kind of taught myself that on the sim. But I will suggest to James, drive a car on the street using your left foot pedal first. So I had a van that I drove and I only left foot braked, and that worked wonders too. But I think the bottom line is, if you're a real racer, then try to replicate as much as you can in the simulator so that it helps you in real life. And like James was talking about, yeah, if you have a very short period of time for qualifying, then see if you can turn that fast lap on, say, lap 3, and it doesn't hurt if you know your race distance is going to be an hour, drive for an hour and see if you can keep your car underneath you that whole time, without putting the wheel off and that type of thing. So, I mean, it's a tool, and the more you use it as a tool, the better off you're going to be, I think.
Thank you. Thijs, a little bit of just some closing words as some of the things that you've learned, or anything else you'd like to add about this particular topic.
Well, it's like said before, it's no longer a game. It's really a sim. And it's a really easy way to go driving. I walk upstairs and get seated and I drive.
And then you look down and you come back and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, right? You go, wow, I've been doing that for a long time.
Yes, true. But it's an easy way. Yeah. It's really easy to go driving, and it's for me also different than the other guys, I guess, because I never have driven on a racetrack myself. Simply, I don't have the budget, so and that's never gonna happen. So it's for me a little bit different than the other guys, but it's easy to do.
That was one of the reasons I wanted you on here. Is number one, you're fairly new with the new rig, but you use it in a different way. You're a mechanic on with some teams. You're aspiring to be a team engineer, and you're really hungry to learn more about data, and that's how you're using it. Maybe a little bit different from some of the others. You and I would be the same in how we're using it. So I thank you for joining us and sharing some of that information. Emiliano, anything you'd like to kind of add as we kind of close this up?
No, nothing more to add. If not the fact that I'm mostly using the simulator for fun rather than for work. But I mean, I'm starting trying to get better work of Race 3 using sim data. But the most for me is fun. It's my way out of working.
Well, thank you for that. But what I would like to share on our way out, a couple things I would like to share is Emiliano did a ton of work in the software team when the pandemic started by taking what was fun and building it into something where we can bring all these 4 different data sets right into the AIM software that many of us know already or love being able to use for this kind of a thing. So while it is fun and you're using it mainly, you call it fun that way, you and the team did a ton of work to get this to work for us all. Very appreciated. The other thing that I want to add, James said it, I think everybody actually said it, but there's only one thing you can't create at the racetrack, no matter how hard you try, and that is time. And that time is so precious that anything we can do in these simulation programs has become so valuable. If you're really interested in improving, I don't care if it's the driving side, the engineering side, all of the different ways of looking at this, the data guy that wants to get better at what they're doing, this is such a valuable tool to help us get better at the craft that we've chosen to be involved with. So that time is so precious that something like this is very important. So I would like to jump towards the end slides here and kind of close this one up. This video, as well as all the rest of them, will be out on our YouTube site just as soon as I can get it done today. All of the links that we've talked about, those of us that are here live, will be also, if you missed them in the chat, they'll be included in the description box on the YouTube page in about an hour. So if there's anything you want to see there, if there's any questions that anybody has, please include them to sim racing at AIM Sportline. If it's software related, just about Race Studio 3, Race Studio 2, software at aimsportline.com is your best way to get those information directly to the teams that are working on these things. I appreciate everybody coming and chatting about this in our first webinar of 2022. It has been great. It's a part of what we do here at AIM Sports. We're a company that we're a customer support company that happens to sell racing electronics, as I like to say, and things like this is just exactly what these webinars are really about. Is just to build this community and get everybody understanding these things better, so we can all learn as well and as quickly as possible. And I think there's just such value to this. I appreciate all the folks that came here and joined us. What we're going to talk about next week is there has been some changes in the latest beta versions of just some of the ways that you're working and seeing, and some of the things that you can do with Race Studio 3 analysis, the beta version. We'll talk at that point. We'll probably have Emiliano, if he's available, maybe we'll join in a little bit with Matt and I. I seen the question go by right here at the end is a production date. Maybe we'll have an update on that in a week or so. When we do this one, we'll chat about that a little bit, but it's getting fairly close, and enough that we'll start to feed in a few more Race Studio 3 analysis webinar topics. We're going to talk about the user interface updates, maybe some new tips and tricks of some things that we've all learned as we've been wintering over and playing with the software a little bit. So if you've been playing with Race Studio 3 using it as the platform, join us next week, Matt, I, and maybe Emiliano, and we will chat about importing data, some better ways of bringing that in, and then of course the user interface. So we'll talk about that next week. Some contact information for the folks here is on the screen. Again, I want to thank the four guys that helped us out: James, Ray, Emiliano, Thijs. Thank you very much. It's been a joy to work with you guys on this and previous webinars, and I think this panel discussion was pretty fun and enjoyable. As I watched the chat, we've been able to get some people have got some real value out of having a talk in this way. We will to end this. The same thing we kind of started with. This wasn't everything about sim racing and how to use it with AIM, but it was more of a reintroduction of the topic, chat about some of the different ways of using it. And I do have a couple of slots in the next 2 or 3 months where we will have sim racing with some more technical steps about some of the different things that we'll get questions on, and things that we want to make sure we want to cover a little bit deeper. So that will be coming soon. So I appreciate everybody coming. Thank you all for being here. Thanks again to our guests that joined us, and everybody is busy, and I appreciate them taking the time to come and do this. So thanks everybody. We will see you in 1 week. Everybody have a great week. Talk to you soon.